Hare Krishna, Jai Shri Radhe. The first blunder that many honest and patriotic historians stumbled across in Bharatiya historical research thus happened to be about the origin of medieval monuments. Before examining the prominent monuments one by one, we would like to point out to the incredulous that we can produce a long list of monuments which so called historians have accepted to be deceptively Muslim, though factually earlier Hindu buildings. This prima facie case should compel their scholarly attention to our contention regarding all the other medieval monuments. The former Punyeshwar and Narayaneshwar temples in Pune are now known as Sheikh Salah Dargahs, big and small respectively. Mahamohopadhyaya Datta Baman Podar, a well-known historian and ex-vice chancellor of the Pune Universities, mentioned this fact in his address as chairman of the reception committee of the Indian History Congress Silver Jubilee session held in Pune in December 1963. The so-called Datta Pir in Ganeshpit, Pune, as a captured Dattatreya temple. The so-called Kamal Maula Mosque at Dhar in central Bharat has now, for past few years, been reluctantly admitted to be the ancient Saraswati Kanthavarana, where Sanskrit dramas inscribed on stone panels used to be preserved. The helpless revelation followed the telltale crumbling of camouflaging plaster. The famous Linga Mahalaya, for instance, a great Shiva temple at Siddhapur in Gujarat, is still being used as a mosque. The Kashi Vishwanath temple in Varanasi is still being used as a mosque. For example, the Gyan Bapi mosque dispute is still going on. The famous Somnath temple was reputed to be and was in fact being used as a mosque until Bharat became free from British rule. During the partition riots, it was discovered that a so-called mosque in the Dariwa Kalan locality of Old Delhi sits pretty on numerous Hindu deities clustered in its basement. The Adhai Din Ka Jhopda at Ajmer has been universally admitted to be a part of Vigraharaj Vishal Deo's seminary. The so-called Qutub Minar at Delhi is now widely admitted to be an earlier Hindu Vishnu Dhwaj tower. Sir Syed Ahmad, the father of the Muslim League and a founder of the Aligarh Muslim Universities, is said to have admitted that, quote, the current tradition which ascribes the Minar means Qutub Minar and the adjoining temple to the Hindu period appears to be correct, unquote. These are only few instances, but if a comprehensive list were to be made of monuments all over Bharat, which are even today admittedly Hindu, though ostensibly Muslim, I am sure it would run into thousands. These instances strengthened the doubts of many genuine patriotic and honest historians like Dr. P.N. Oak, and they started closely examining the other monuments ascribed to Muslim rulers. And surprisingly enough, they found that they revealed enough evidence to convince an open mind about their Hindu origin. After having made out a prima facie case, let us now examine some of the major well-known monuments throughout Bharat to see what proof we find of their Hindu origin and of the inconsistencies apparent in regarding them to be Muslim constructions. Let us first have a look at Kashmir. Only a few centuries back, the vale of Kashmir reverberated to the chant of Sanskrit mantras. Ruins of battered Hindu buildings can still be seen at Martand and other sites in Kashmir. The name of its capital, Srinagar, is still Sanskrit. The name of the river Jhelum flowing through the valley is derived from the Sanskrit word Jalam, meaning water. The shrine of the great Sanskrit philosopher and spiritual master Adi Shankaracharya on a hill in Srinagar is a famous landmark. About 20 miles before we reach Srinagar is a diversion which leads us by a 10 to 12 miles motorable road to Berinag. This marks the source of the river Jhelum, which emerges as a clear blue water fount from under the surface on plain and level ground. Verinag is a slight variation of the Sanskrit Barinag, meaning water serpent. Hindus are known for their cobra worship. Popular Hindu lore credits a cobra which being the main prop of our earth. True to tradition, a temple of Varinag still nestles in a shanty under a nearby tree. The river fount is enclosed in a small circular cistern. Around the cistern is a 8 to 10 feet high plinth with arched vaults. Inside these dark vaults are ancient Hindu stone images still worshipped by Dogra priests, wearing turbans on their heads and sandal paste marks on their foreheads. Nearby can be seen the remains of extensive plinths, clearly indicating that some building which stood there has been demolished. These indications are enough to convince an impartial observer that the ancient Berinag temple which stood there was destroyed by Muslim conquerors. The area, if excavated, is sure to yield more images and other evidence. In spite of this overwhelming evidence, a comparatively recent red stone tablet has been interpolated at the site to announce shamelessly in modern Urdu that the masonry work enclosing the fount was constructed at Akbar's or Jahangir's behest. That claim cannot stand cross-examination. The extant masonry construction, such as it is, would hardly do credit even to a common devout householder of moderate means, much less to a mighty emperor of Hindustan. Enclosing river founts in cisterns is a holy duty for Hindus, while it has never been a part of Muslim tradition. Had a Muslim emperor been the builder, the premises would have been a mosque and not the haunt of Hindu priests and Hindu deities. Ancient Hindu images and a recent improvised temple of Varinag could never have existed at the site. Moreover, the name Varinag would have long back been changed to something in sonorous Arabic. All these considerations show that instead of undertaking any building construction on the site, Akbar and Jahangir destroyed the ancient Barinag temple to which the existing plinth bears mute witness. This incidentally leads to an ancillary principle. The principle is that whenever the name of a Muslim ruler attaches to a monument which from all evidence appears to be of Hindu origin, the Muslim ruler must be regarded as the conqueror and destroyer of that monument rather than its builder. Let us also be clear about another important point. Die-hard historians are prone to decry the kind of evidence I am leading as mere theorizing and conjectures. They clamor for what they call documentary evidence. Let me tell them once for all that they know not what they are talking about. Firstly, they themselves have been guilty of Having ascribed the various medieval monuments to different Muslim sultans and emperors on mere hearsay without any documentary proof, such as wage bills, blueprints, and day to day expense accounts of the monuments. At times, they have had the flimsy support of a few slay statements in the memoirs of a Muslim rulers and chronicles of medieval Muslim writers, mostly employed by the rulers themselves. But they know fully well, as we do, that there are ever so many versions of these memoirs and chronicles widely differing from each other, and cursory references to a few monuments are found in isolated versions. Historians also know that these chronicles and memoirs are notorious for containing wishful thinking, half truths, gross prevarications, daydreams, and deceitful chauvinistic claims. In actual life, whenever we are confronted with suspicious documents on the one side and contradictory factual evidence on the other, it is always the latter which prevails. Take the instance of a dead body lying by the roadside, which has a note on it purporting to say that the person has committed suicide. That note is, in a way, documentary evidence. But will our so called historians depend on it and refuse to investigate the death, even though the body bears a stab wound in the back? In such a case, the so called document will be thrown away as trash and the death will be investigated as murder. The same principle applies to medieval monuments, which are just like dead bodies lying mutilated and have suspicious antecedents. Let not therefore tradition bound historians make a fetish of so called documentary proof and throw their hands up in simulated horror at the kind of evidence I am leading. The above explanation should convince them that the kind of evidence I am leading can stand in a court of law for decisive judgments, as against the kind of flimsy and fabricated bland statements that they have been banking upon, and that too in a very few cases all these centuries. Having dealt before with some considerations fundamental to my thesis, I shall now turn to a few other prominent monuments in Kashmir. There are two beautiful landscape gardens in Kashmir known as Nisad and Shalimar. History has wrongly ascribed them to the Mughals. Nisad and Shalimar means a variation of Shalimarg, are both Sanskrit words. Nisad means well trimmed. As such, it can apply only to gardens. That is also a current Hindu surname prevalent in Kashmir, signifying a very talented and accomplished family. Salimarg means a mountain track winding through rice fields. Rice field is called sal, or through tall timber trees. Timber trees also called sal. Throughout the gardens, one can discern a plinth pattern suggesting that the gardens were enclosed by fortifications and were part of demolished palaces. Their gateways still stand, as do the walls and bastions on some flanks. The gateways are in the ornate Hindu style. Besides, the Mughals, with their seat in faraway Agra, could by no stretch of imagination hope to enjoy the beauty and cooling of gardens laid 700 miles away. The way, moreover, lay through dense forests and steep hilly country. A visit to Kashmir then was, as it is even now, in spite of modern air services, but a dream for a Mughal monarch to traverse that distance at the leisurely pace of an elephant and with all his wealth and person and harem exposed to hostile attacks for the dubious pleasure of spending a few cool hours in Nisat and Salimar once in a lifetime was silly in the extreme. The same argument applies to what is called the Shahi Chashma, meaning the royal fount. That fount had been patronized by the Hindu royalty of Kashmir through the ages. Hence, its Urdu name Shahi Chashma is a mere translation of the old Sanskrit name Raj Nirjhar. The famous Lake Dal is also a Sanskrit origin. Dal means a leaf and signifies foliage. The floating gardens in that lake and its abounding lotus plants are a permanent attraction, which explains the name Dal. The names of many other tracts in Kashmir are still Sanskrit, such as Sonmarg, meaning a golden path, and Gulmarg, which was formerly Gauri Marg, meaning the path of goddess Gauri. The name Chandanwadi is also a pure Sanskrit. It will thus be seen that in Kashmir there is hardly any trace of Muslim culture except in its population, which was forcibly converted to Islam. Another place known as Jain Lanka in Ular Lake was built by a king called Ravana, whose name is found among Kashmir's pre-Muslim Hindu ruler. Since in the Ramayana, Ravana's capital was Lanka. It was that Hindu king Ravana who built the palace in the Ular Lake and called it Lanka. Later, when a Muslim ruler called Jainuddin made it his residence, the palace got associated with his name. Our historians, who therefore assert that Jainuddin built the Lanka palace in Ular Lake, are guilty of a gross error. This should suffice to convince all that all medieval monuments, such as any exist in Kashmir, were built by pre-Muslim Rajput rulers. If any Muslims had built them, they would never have conjured up Sanskrit names for those monuments. Moreover, we would have also been able to lay our hands on documents concerning the construction of these monuments in Muslim court records. Previous Rajput records were all burnt by the Muslim rulers in their fanatic wrath and also with a view to claim ownership and authorship of the buildings themselves. In the absence of the necessary documents on their side, we have to turn to factual evidence, which is overwhelmingly in favor of Hindu Rajput authorship of all medieval buildings in Bharat, be they mausoleums, tombs, shrines, mosques, forts, or palaces. To historians who still fail to see the cogency and force of the above factual evidence and arguments, I would suggest that they better search their hearts and ascertain whether it is their professional fear of loss of faith which is masquerading as righteous scholarly indignation at the so-called absence of documentary evidence. They may themselves ponder on the fact whether their traditional claims in favor of this or that sultan are based on documentary evidence. There is also no reason why we should express despair and helplessness in the absence of documentary evidence and the falsity of medieval chronicles. We never display such utter helplessness when we have to investigate, say, a murder committed without even a trace of apparent evidence. It is common day-to-day experience that such murders are ultimately brought home to the murderers on the basis of strong and irrefutable circumstantial evidence. This should prove that whenever we are faced with falsification, absence, or destruction of documentary evidence, we can arrive at indisputable conclusions with the help of circumstantial evidence. It is precisely because scholars of Bharatiya history paid no heed to this very sound and well-tried method of judicial investigation that Bharatiya medieval history happens to be riddled with numerous inconsistencies, contradictions, absurdities, and enigmas. It is a pity that all those who wrote medieval Bharatiya history failed to take notice of all the relevant facts before jumping to their conclusions and rising monsters of myths which they and we all find difficult to get off our chest.